But now Harry Secombe visits Winchester's magnificent cathedral and college and talks to the newly installed dean.
Hello and welcome to Winchester, a fascinating city which 1,000 years ago was the nation's capital. Behind me in the distance is the statue of King Alfred the Great, famous as a king but notorious as a failed cake maker. This is Buttercross. It's 500 years old, but nobody knows who built it or why they built it. It's a funny old world, isn't it? But today we're staying in and around the magnificent cathedral and the college. So while I'm making my way over there, why don't you listen to the Winchester Cathedral Choir with their own arrangement of Let Their Celestial Concerts All Unite by Handel. Let me tell you a few things about the cathedral. It was built by the Normans. The work began in 1079, and 14 years later it was ready for consecration, which took place on St. Swithin's Day. People must have thought they were mad when they chose to build a cathedral on a marsh, but their brilliant engineers made the foundation secure by using a vast layer of peat and beech logs. 600 years ago, the decision was taken to reconstruct the west front, which would have made it the envy of the world. But alas, the work was interrupted by the Black Plague. The temporary plaster front still stands today, although temporary plaster 600 years old seems pretty permanent to me. I always feel very privileged working on Highway, because not only do I get to visit wonderful cathedrals like this one, but I usually get brilliant guides to show me around, and today is no exception. The director of the Cathedral Trust, who was for 17 years the headmaster of Winchester College, John Thorne. Nice to see you, John.
And you, Harry?
Now, I may ask you to give us the standing-on-the-spot conducted tour of the cathedral.
Well, first thing to say, of course, is this is not the first cathedral that was here. The first one was a Saxon one, built just down by the West End, and very little trace of that remains except the foundations. And interestingly enough, when that cathedral was there and King Alfred was on the throne of England, this was one of the intellectual, artistic centres of the whole of Western Europe, long before this cathedral was thought of, the one we're in now. So this great place was started, and then for centuries afterwards, they reclothed it, you might say, with this woodwork here of the choir, with the nave being altered from a thick, heavy Norman nave to a light Gothic one, as we call it. All this happened over the centuries. And behind us, you see the altar, and behind that is the magnificent reredos, as it's called, a great stone screen. The stonework is the 15th century, and the statues we see there now were put in the late 19th century. If you go and look at them very closely, you can see that the stonework is different. This is called Rufus's tomb. I say it's called Rufus's tomb because there's a theory that inside this rather dark box, the bones of William Rufus do not actually reside. He didn't much approve of the Christian religion of Rufus, and therefore I always feel a certain irony in having him bang in the middle of this place where all the holy mysteries are celebrated almost daily. There's Rufus, if he's there, grinding his teeth with rage. And one of the most famous tombs also in the cathedral is that of Jane Austen. And interestingly enough, when they came to write something on her tomb, they never mentioned the fact that she was a novelist at all.
St. Swithin is buried here, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yes, St. Swithin, who was supposed to have such an extraordinary effect on the weather, as you will have noticed today. And,
not working, is it?
his tomb is behind the choir and can be visited. But to me, he's a slightly gloomy figure, even though he was full of virtue.
Tell us about the museum.
Now this is a project which is very exciting. We hope to open in 1988, and when we've opened it, this museum is going to be, I reckon, one of the most remarkable collections of medieval art in the whole of Western Europe, and I hope plenty of people come and see it.
And the library?
The library, well, it's a wonderful cathedral library, and one of its treasures is the Winchester Bible, which is an example of that glorious school of English painting and drawing, which began in this town of Winchester before the Norman conquest and went right through to the 12th century. Inside, I think it's perhaps one of the most wonderful cathedrals in the world. Outside, you wouldn't necessarily think that. But my word, it's expensive to keep it up. We reckon about £400,000 additional to what people pay in collections and all the rest of it must be somehow come to the cathedral if it's going to last for another few hundred years. The last thing I want to show you is the 12th century chapel of the Holy Sepulchre, which contains these wonderful drawings on the walls, which you can have lit up if you put 10 pence in the box.
Isn't that marvellous?
You're seeing here a drawing of the entombment of Christ, one of the finest examples, I think, of line drawing and colouring in the Western world of that era.
Thank you very much, John. Every cathedral has its own workshop, but this one here at Winchester is just that little bit different because it employs a lady mason. Afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
How do you do? You must be Norman Gooding.
That's right. That's
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And you must be Lydia Kirk.
Oh,
Nice to see you too.
Nice to see you.
When did you decide to become a mason?
When I left Newcastle University, where I studied art, I thought it sounded a very interesting career to go
Yes.
into. Yeah.
So how many years have you been here?
7 years now, just over.
Is it hard work? Do you need to be strong?
Yes, you do. It's hard work physically, and there's quite a lot of lifting, and you need to have plenty of stamina and everything. Yes, you do.
What are you working on at the moment?
This is a piece of tracery that's going up on one of the pinnacles on the west front we're restoring.
So you're really you're going back to the old workers then. Do you feel an affinity with the
Yes.
old stonemasons?
Oh, very much so, because we do everything the old way. We don't use any machinery or anything like that. We saw by hand, and everything's chiselled by hand, and no power at all, really.
And how many lady masons are there in England?
I shouldn't think very many. You could probably count them on both hands. But that's working on cathedrals. I suspect
Yes.
there are a few more in the lettering trade and perhaps the carving trade more, but just masonry, I think, there are very few.
Well, nice to talk to you, Lydia. I'm always delighted to receive songs from highway viewers. I've already sung some of the programme, and I'm going to sing another one tonight. It's called Cover Me With Love. The writer wishes to remain anonymous. She only asks that any proceeds from the song go to the Musicians' Benevolent Fund. In gratitude, she says, for all the pleasure that music and musicians have afforded me.
Cover me with roses, wet with morning dew. Cover me with starshine and sweet rainbow's hue. Cover me with soft leaves on an autumn day. Cover me with happiness as I go on my way. Cover me with raindrops when my heart is dry. Cover me with snowflakes from an ice blue sky. Cover me with kisses when as friends we meet. Cover me with love, dear Lord, as I listen at thy feet. And when my journey's over and I've ceased to be, cover me with peace, dear Lord, as I journey back to thee.
This is the memorial to William Walker, or Diver Bill, as he was known in these parts. He was the cathedral's most unusual character. For 6 years, Diver Bill worked in conditions like these in the crypt to save the building from collapse. It's a story of great courage and determination. As I mentioned earlier, the Normans chose a site on a marsh, and it wasn't long before their foundations started sinking. And by the turn of the century, huge cracks had appeared, and parts of the building had to be shored up. A plan was drawn up in 1906 to dig trenches under the walls and replace the peat with bags of concrete. But digging trenches in 13 feet of water is a bit tricky, and pumps were not very effective. Then someone had a brainwave. Why bother pumping it out when a diver could do the work underwater? A week later, William Walker arrived, the best diver in Britain. He had beaten the deep diving record, so working 13 feet underwater was a picnic. Although he had to work in a kind of soup of liquid peat, so he couldn't see his hands in front of his face. What Walker did was to dig out the peat from under the cathedral, a section at a time. He had a large support team on the surface, and they hauled out the buckets of peat that he'd filled. Then they lowered the bags of concrete to him, and he began to lay them in layers on the gravel bed. Diver Bill worked 6 hours a day for nearly 7 years. He'd turn up at 8 o'clock every morning and then get dressed for work. It took him just about an hour to put on the rubber suits and all his attachments, the boots and the helmet, increasing his weight by a staggering 200 pounds. Then they'd start turning the air pump, and down he'd go. Winchester has never forgotten Diver Bill and the part he played in saving the cathedral from collapse. When you visit a great cathedral, your first impression is that only a few choir boys and guides work there. How wrong can you be? This group consists of maintenance men, cleaners, office workers, librarian, a curator, musicians, gardeners, and bell ringers. And the man in charge of them all is the newly appointed Dean, Reverend Trevor Beeson. We've seen them all before.
Well, yes, not until today, and thank you very much indeed for giving me this opportunity of meeting so many for the first time. I suppose it must be the first time a Dean of Winchester has actually been presented to his community by a television personality. Certainly it must be the first time he's appeared before them with makeup on his face.
Now, tell me, where were you before you came here?
Westminster Abbey. I've had 10.5 years at Westminster Abbey and as chaplain of the House of Commons.
Well, do you find this a quiet backwater after being in the centre of things at
Why,
Westminster.
backwater, Winchester? Not at all. It is a very lively and thriving place. You don't think I would have come from Westminster to a backwater? No, not at all. It's different, of course, very, very different, but obviously got its own bubbling life, and I'm excited at the prospect of having a leadership role within it.
What do you see the future here, then?
Well, the future won't be very different from the past. My job is to get to know this community and to love this community and help it on into the next phase of its life. But its work must always be the same, that of offering worship to Almighty God day in and day out, as it has done for 9 centuries, and also helping the many people who come here to experience something of the Christian faith and its meaning for today, which they do partly through absorbing the building itself, but also, we hope, through the preaching and the teaching and the fellowship and the companionship and the compassionate care which any church, not just the cathedral, but any church must give. So there's no change of policy. It is just a development on those 2 vertical and horizontal lines.
Very best of luck with your work, sir. And you have a reading for us. Will you tell us about it?
Yes, I came across it in an old book the other day, and it's a very moving one. It was written by a schoolboy at Winchester College in 1885, when he was reflecting on the great walls and all the historic buildings of Winchester and thinking about what their meaning would be for us today. And what seemed right to him in 1885 is, I'm sure, still right for us today. Except the Lord with guarding hand shall stay beside our rising wall, except the watchman at his stand can on our God for succor call, then all our work is thrown away, and strength and skill and foresight fail. Look thou on what we build today, that by thy grace it may prevail. And when with stone a wall we raise, to keep our dwelling place within, set thou about our heart always a fence against the storm of sin. But on the builder still the pain of fear and inward doubting falls, lest sense oppression, lust of gain, should taint his houses, foul his walls. Then let the town for thee increase, for thee the tide of commerce flow, lest secret rapine pass for peace, and wealth of one be others' woe.
So we set him round with dismal stories, do but themselves confound his strength the more is. Nor either can he fright, he'll be a giant fight, but he will have a right to be a pilgrim. All growling more for fear, and growth his spirit. He knows he at the end shall life inherit. Their fancies fly away, he'll fear not what men say. He'll lay the night and day to be a pilgrim.
This is the tomb of William of Wykeham, perhaps the greatest Hampshire man of all time. A man of humble birth who eventually became Bishop of Winchester. He founded Winchester College in 1382, and amazingly, it cost only £1,014. And it would be almost sacrilege to come to the cathedral without visiting Winchester College. So let's go and meet James Savinclair, who's been headmaster for the last 2 years. James, you came to be headmaster from within the school, didn't you?
I did, yes, and that's fairly unusual. The last time it happened here was about 50 years ago.
Your daughter's a pupil here, isn't she?
My daughter's a pupil, my son is a pupil here as well. We don't take any girls apart from the daughters of members of staff doing their A-levels. And at the moment, there are only 3 girls in the school. So far, we've all been surviving it. It's a question of whether they're more embarrassment to me or me to them.
What's the cost per year per pupil here?
Well, if you're paying the full fee, it costs about £6,500 a year, which is a lot of money. But there are quite a number of boys in the school who aren't paying anything at all.
They're called scholars, aren't they?
Yes, there have been scholars at Winchester elected every year since 1393, without exception.
But apart from tradition, you're well into the 20th century, aren't you, with computers and everything?
Yes, that's right. Just because we're an old school, it does not mean that we're an old-fashioned school. To be successful, we have to keep up at the forefront of education, and where there are new developments in education, we're there, we're interested.
What careers do the boys take up when they leave here?
We produce a lot of lawyers, a lot of teachers, a certain number of civil servants, though not as many as people suppose, a certain number of diplomats, politicians. There are 3 old Wickhamists in the cabinet at the moment.
Who are they?
They are Whitelaw and Geoffrey Howe and George Younger.
You're also involved in many charitable projects, including Action Aid, aren't you?
Yes, I think it's very important that boys who have the advantage of an education here and are so well looked after here should be made constantly aware of how fortunate they are in their circumstances. We've done things for a Winchester Children's Holiday Trust, and we support Action Aid. We have 3 of our boarding houses who are paying for the education of boys in African schools.
What about sport?
We have this curious game, only played here, called Winchester football. It's almost best played knee-deep in mud. You can play it in deep snow. I mean, really, the only reason we continue to play it is because the boys enjoy it.
And finally, you have a great tradition of music and art here, haven't you?
Yes. The school was founded not just with 70 scholars, but with 16 choir boys as well. And we managed to keep these 16 choir boys as part of our foundation right up until today. But we choose them, we help to pay for them, and they sing in our services, they play in our orchestras, they greatly enrich our musical life.
Wenn ihr kommt, wenn ihr kommt, wenn ihr wie drum kommt, hey, mein Schatz bei dir, kann ich gleich nicht allbald bei dir sein, an ihr doch mein Freund an dir. Wenn ihr kommt, wenn ihr kommt, wenn ihr wie drum kommt, hey, mein Schatz bei dir. Wie du weinst, dass ich wandern muss, wie wenn Lieb jetzt wär vorbei. Sind auch draus der Mädel viel, lieber Schatz, sie bleibt dir treu. Denk du nicht, wenn ich ein anderer seh, so sei mein Leben vorbei. Sind da draus der Mädel viel, lieber Schatz, sie bleibt dir treu. Übers Jahr, wenn wir treu bei der Schneid, stell ich mich wie drum ein. Bin ich dann dein Schätzele noch, so soll die Hochzeit sein. Übers Jahr, da ist mein Sein vorbei, da gehör ihm mein und dein. Bin ich dann dein Schätzele noch,
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Can I get in here? What are your names?
Edward, Mark, Jonathan, William, Tom, Christopher, Francis, Sebastian.
Harry.
Julian.
I believe there are more of you, but they're not here.
Yes, I'm afraid half of them are sick. Flu. Is that right?
Oh, what a shame. Well, what's this hall we're in, then, Julian?
This is called the College Hall, and it's where the scholars, there are 70 of them, where they have their meals. And in the old days, these chaps, poor fellows, had to wait at table and serve the scholars with their food. And if they were slow about it and the college boys didn't eat quickly enough, they didn't get any breakfast because they had to get off to chapel.
What sort of stuff do you teach them?
Well, we sing ordinary church music and folk songs, Schubert, Rossini.
Anything?
We sang a song last term called Primitive Blues. So we cover anything we can get our hands on.
You don't sing at the cathedral at all?
No, that's where the choristers sing.
Yeah.
The colleagues of these boys, you see. They're all taught together.
They all talk
They're
together,
all
but
taught
they're
together,
separate.
but they're separate for
yes.
singing.
Well, the voice is going to break. That's the next thing, isn't it?
Oh, we got one who's not here. He's one of the ones in bed.
He's lying down with a broken voice.
Top C, come on. Ready? Ready? Oh! You cheated.
Oh, I took a breath. No, he's good.
I think he took an extra breath. Hey, what she did? It's back to bed for him.
Life can be very unfair sometimes. I mean, if you travel over 70 miles an hour on the motorway, you probably end up with a ticket for speeding. Now, here's a man who travels more than 633 miles an hour, and all he got was applause. I'm talking about the holder of the land speed record, Richard Noble. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Richard. Harry Secombe, pleased to meet you. Lads, if you care to try and break the world land speed record back to the headmaster's study, he's got something for you. Nice to see you all. Now then, sir.
Harry.
633 miles an hour. What went through your mind when you were reaching that tremendous speed?
Well, Harry, there isn't really, when you're doing this sort of thing, there isn't really much room for emotion or any other sort of really extraneous thought. You know, all that goes through your mind is, I mustn't mess this up. There's not really much room for emotion.
How do the family feel about you travelling at such a speed?
Well, it's difficult to explain, Harry. I love driving thrust. I mean, I really love it. And poor old Sally, you know, went through a pretty rough time watching all this. But we got a very good team. This was the key to the thing. Tremendous team, and we knew it was a good car.
What inspired you to do this?
A childhood dream, really. It goes right back to 1952, when my parents took me for a drive around the north side of Loch Ness, and John Cobb was going for the water speed record there, and I saw his boat, and I never actually saw it go, but I saw it, and I thought, that's fantastic. And
That
I
was
really
for
want to
you?
do something. Oh, rather, that was it, yes.
Well, what do you remember about school here? I mean, take it
I
back
had the most wonderful time here, I really did. I was a total rebel. I'm afraid, you know, I'm not very good on the sort of academic side of things, but I really enjoyed myself.
When you come back here today, did that up there mean anything to
Well,
you?
it did rather, Harry, because this is what it was all about 20-odd years ago.
Yes.
In other words, either learn or leave, or take the third option, which is be beaten.
And were you beaten?
Frequently, yes.
What are you doing now?
Well, Harry, I'm into a fascinating thing. I've got an aircraft company, and we're building a beautiful little aircraft. I've got a little model here. It's called the Super 2, and it's 3 years ahead of the rest of the world. It's very exciting.
Good luck with it.
Thank you.
And before you, a little surprise. Now, I want to take you back a quarter of a century, right?
Right.
Do you remember the man who taught you French?
There were many people who tried to teach me French.
I think one succeeded, because he's here.
How are you?
Did I succeed?
You did, indeed. How nice to see you again.
I was trying to remember which of the nobles you were, and I'm glad that I do recognize you.
Well, you know what my housemaster once said.
I have to tell you now that Highway next week comes from Hartlepool, because the time has come to leave Winchester, a city growing old with grace. And the last song expresses the hope that I may do the same.
They say I've reached the time of life that's slightly past the prime of life, and yet, towards the sun I'm turning. They tell me save myself. It's time that I behave myself. And yet, there are bridges still for burning. Let the young and foolish pick the blossom on the vine. They have years to waste before they'll taste the flavor of the wine. The rosebuds I've been gathering, the children I've been fathering, may fade and die, take wings and fly, and lead to my regret. And yet, it seems to me the best is